She hid in the shack everyone swore was cursed, thinking the town's fear would protect her. But on the third night, she woke to the creak of the door and saw the silhouette of a tall man cut against the moon. He was the owner of the place, and he didn't look surprised to find her there. Have you ever had to choose between certain danger and the unknown? Cecily Andrews had to make that choice on a freezing night in June, when every door in the village slammed in her face, leaving only that shack on the river bend. The place folks said harbored evil spirits and ghostly wails that made grown men weep with terror. But this story begins in the backwoods of Georgia in 1928, in the small settlement of Blackwood Creek, where the muddy river cut through the red clay like an old scar, and cattle ranches stretched for miles under the immense southern sky. If you're enjoying this story, drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. Write down your city, your state, or even your country if you're far from the US. I love knowing these tales of yesteryear reach so many different places and touch hearts that understand the value of a good story about overcoming the odds. Comment down below, I read them all. And if you haven't subscribed to the Old Time Tales channel yet, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any emotional stories like this one. Cecily woke up that June morning, not knowing it was the last time she'd sleep in that narrow bed in the back room of Aunt Martha's house. The sun hadn't fully risen when she heard a sharp rap on the door. Aunt Martha entered without knocking, her face hard as stone, beneath a grey braid pinned high on her head. "Cecily, pack your things and get out of my house now," the woman said, her voice cutting like a knife. "I want you gone before the neighbors wake up." Cecily sat up, her heart racing. "But Aunt Martha, what did I do?" she asked with a trembling voice. "You're my godmother. You've raised me since Mama died. What happened?" The older woman crossed her arms over her thin chest. "What happened is that you disrespected this house and me," she replied with tight lips. "Mr. Silas Thorne, a good man, a respected widower, a prosperous merchant, asked for your hand in marriage. Any honest girl would fall to her knees, thanking God for such luck. But you ungrateful girl, had the audacity to refuse." Cecily's stomach turned. Silas Thorne was 50 years old, with fat, sweaty hands and breath that reeked of tobacco and moonshine. For the past few weeks, whenever Aunt Martha went to the market, he would show up at the house with flimsy excuses. He brought expensive fabrics, satin ribbons, imported chocolates that Cecily never accepted. He cornered the girl in the kitchen, got too close, whispered things that made her skin crawl with disgust. Once he tried to touch her face, and she recoiled so fast she knocked a cast-iron skillet to the floor with a clang. "Godmother, Mr. Thorne is not a good man," Cecily said, getting out of bed, her voice gaining firmness despite her fear. "He stalks me when you aren't here. He says indecent things. He corners me. He tries to touch me. I cannot marry a man like that. I'd rather die." The slap came fast, cracking against Cecily's face with a force that turned her head to the side. "Impudent, lying, insolent girl," hissed Aunt Martha, her eyes flashing. "Mr. Thorne told me you're the one provoking him, sashaying around the house, wearing short dresses, casting looks. He said you're one of those loose women who seduce good men and then feign innocence. I should have seen it sooner. Your mother was just the same." The words hurt more than the slap. Cecily brought a hand to her burning cheek, feeling tears sting her eyes. "I never did that," she said, her voice choked. "You've known me since I was 12. You know I've always been respectful, hard-working, obedient. Why would you believe a stranger over me?" Aunt Martha turned her back, her spine rigid. "Because Silas Thorne is an important merchant. He has money. He has a name. He has standing." She spoke without looking back. "And you are nothing but a charity case I've fed for 8 years. He came here last night, humiliated, saying you rejected him with harsh words. He offered $500 as a dowry, and you spit in the face of fortune. Well, now you'll see what it's like to live without anyone's protection." I want you out in half an hour." Cecily looked around the tiny room. Almost nothing there was hers. 2 sets of worn clothes, a patched shawl that had been her mother's, a hairbrush with a cracked handle, a yellowed photo of the parents who died when she was 12. She packed everything into a cloth bundle while tears flowed silently. It wasn't the expulsion that hurt the most. It was realizing she never had a real home. She had always been tolerated, never loved. She was always the orphan Aunt Martha accepted out of a sense of religious duty, not kindness. When she walked out the front door, the sun was rising, painting the sky in orange and pink. The village of Blackwood Creek was waking up slowly. Smoke rose from chimneys, roosters crowed in backyards. The smell of brewed coffee spread through the fresh morning air. Cecily walked down the red dirt road with her bundle in her arms, feeling the eyes already watching her from windows. News travelled fast in a small town. Everyone probably already knew she had refused Silas Thorne. He had probably already spread his version of the facts. The first door she knocked on was Mrs. Higgins's, the seamstress who had always praised Cecily's embroidery. The woman opened the door, listened to the plea for work or temporary shelter, and shook her head with genuine pity in her eyes. "Oh, honey, I wish I could help, but I can't," she whispered, looking around as if afraid of being overheard. "Mr. Thorne is my best customer. He supplies the fabrics for my shop. If I take you in, he could boycott me. I'm sorry." And she closed the door slowly, carefully, as if that softened the rejection. The second door was Mr. Miller's general store. The man didn't even let Cecily finish speaking. "Miss, I've heard the rumors," he said briskly. "I don't want any trouble. Silas Thorne said you're a woman of ill repute. I can't have someone like that working here. Good families won't want to buy from me." The third, fourth, fifth door repeated the pattern. Pity mixed with fear. Sympathy blocked by convenience. Some people were openly cruel, others cruelly kind, explaining with patience why they couldn't help. Cecily walked through the entire village as the sun climbed the sky and the June heat intensified. Thirst began to bother her, hunger too, but worse than anything was the humiliation of being looked at with disdain by people who, days ago, greeted her politely. In the middle of the afternoon, exhausted, she sat in the shade of a pecan tree near the chapel. Her legs ached, her face burned from the sun, her stomach growled. Cecily leaned her head against the rough bark and closed her eyes, trying to think. She had no money. She had nowhere to go. The nearest town was 10 miles away, an impossible walk under that scorching sun without food or water. And even if she got there, what would she do? She knew no one. She had no references. A young woman alone was viewed with suspicion. When the chapel bell struck 4 in the afternoon, Cecily saw Silas Thorne crossing the square. The man came from the store carrying packages, his protruding belly stretching his linen vest, a Panama hat protecting his flushed, sweaty face. He saw her. He stopped. He smiled. It was a smile that made Cecily's blood run cold. Silas changed course and came toward her with slow, confident steps. Cecily stood up quickly, holding her bundle against her chest like a shield. The man stopped 6 feet away, his small eyes scanning her body in a way that made her feel dirty. "So, little missy, tired of playing proud yet?" he asked with a smooth voice that didn't match his predatory expression. "You've been all over town, from what I hear. Nobody wants you. What a surprise." Cecily raised her chin, trying to look brave despite the fear locking her knees. "You spread lies about me," she accused with a steady voice. "You told people I'm loose, that I provoked you. None of that is true." Silas shrugged, his smile widening. "Truth is what people believe, my dear," he replied, pulling a cigar from his pocket. "And people believe me because I have money and respect. You have nothing. So my word counts and yours doesn't. Simple as that." He struck a match, lit the cigar, blew out bluish smoke. "But look, I'm still willing to marry you." I know you're a difficult girl, hard-headed, but I like that. I like a woman with fire. I'll break you in nicely after the wedding." Nausea rose in Cecily's throat. "I'd rather die than marry you," she said through gritted teeth. The man laughed, a low, unpleasant sound. "Dying isn't necessary," he said, taking a step closer. "But suffering, oh, you'll do plenty of that. I'll ensure no one in this village or the surrounding area gives you work, food, or a roof. I'll make you crawl with hunger and despair, and when you come begging me on your knees, and you will, I might accept you as a mistress instead of a wife, because a sassy girl like you doesn't deserve my last name." He tossed a coin onto the dirt right at her feet. "Buy some bread," he said with disdain. "You'll need strength to endure the coming weeks." And he walked away whistling a cheerful tune, his heavy boots kicking up dust in the street. Cecily didn't pick up the coin. She stood trembling, not from cold, but from a mix of rage and fear. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Shadows lengthened. The village began lighting oil lamps and candles in the windows. Families gathered for supper. Children were called inside. Doors closed. Normal life went on for everyone except her. When night fell completely, Cecily was still in the square. The June chill began to bite. She pulled her mother's shawl over her shoulders, but it didn't help much. The temperature in the open country plummeted at night, especially in June, a dry and chilly month. Cecily felt her body shiver. She needed to find shelter, anything. A shed, a barn, a corner of a stable, any place that would protect her from the cutting cold. That was when she remembered the shack. Every child in Blackwood Creek grew up hearing stories about the cursed shack on the river bend. It was about a 20-minute walk from the village, isolated at the edge of the woods, built near the bank, where the Blackwood River made a sharp curve. The place had dark wooden walls, a rusted tin roof, broken windows, a crooked door. They said 3 different families had tried to live there over the years. All fled in terror in less than a month. The rumors about the shack were terrifying and varied. Some said at night you could hear a woman crying from inside, a high-pitched, desperate wail that froze the blood. Others swore they saw shadows moving behind the broken windows even when no one was inside, dark shapes that seemed to watch passers-by. Some claimed objects moved on their own, that doors slammed violently even without wind, that heavy footsteps echoed on the floorboards when the moon was full. Mrs. Higgins, the seamstress, swore her brother-in-law had spent a night there on a drunken bet and woke up with white hair from terror, unable to speak coherently for 3 days. But Cecily had no choice. Biting cold, stomach growling with hunger, body exhausted. The fear of ghosts seemed smaller than the fear of freezing to death in the square. She stood up on shaky legs, adjusted the bundle under her arm, and began walking toward the edge of the village. The dirt road wound between barbed wire fences marking pastures where cattle slept standing up, large, motionless shadows in the dark. The crescent moon gave weak light, just enough for Cecily not to trip over stones and potholes. The sound of her own footsteps echoed too loudly in the silence of the night. Owls hooted in the trees, crickets sang in the dry grass. Far off, a dog barked. Normal, natural sounds, but in the darkness and despair, they seemed threatening. Cecily began to hum softly to ward off the fear. It was a hymn her mother used to sing when she was little, about a brave soul walking through the valley of shadows. Her trembling voice cut the silence, off-key but persistent. It helped. It kept her company. After 20 minutes of walking, the road curved, and Cecily saw the shack. It was even worse than she remembered. The wooden structure looked tilted to one side, as if the earth had settled unevenly under the foundation. The tin roof was torn in places, exposing the rotted beams underneath. One of the windows had broken glass, forming sharp, jagged teeth that shone faintly in the moonlight. The other window was simply empty, a dark hole like a blind eye. The front door hung loose on one hinge, half open, creaking lightly in the night breeze. Tall pines and oaks surrounded the shack on three sides, twisted branches stretching over the roof like claws. On the fourth side, about 30 feet away, ran the Blackwood River. Cecily could hear the sound of water flowing, a constant mesmerizing murmur. The smell of damp clay, decaying vegetation, moss and old wood permeated the air. Cecily stopped in front of the shack, her heart hammering in her chest. She wanted to turn around and go back to the village, even if it meant spending the night exposed in the square. But the cold was tightening its grip. Her fingers were already numb. Her body shook uncontrollably. If she didn't go in, she might not survive until dawn. She took a deep breath, prayed a quiet prayer for protection, and pushed the door. The wood groaned loudly, a high-pitched sound that cut the night like a scream. Cecily froze, waiting. Nothing happened, no shadow moved, no supernatural voice yelled for her to leave, just heavy silence and stagnant air. She entered slowly. Inside, the darkness was almost total. Only the weak moonlight entering through the broken windows allowed her to distinguish vague shapes. Cecily waited for her eyes to adjust. Gradually, the interior of the shack revealed itself. It was a single room, no partitions. Wide plank floors, many loose and warped, bare wooden walls, stained with damp, with cracks that let the wind in. In the left corner, a rusted, dirty wood stove. In the right corner, the remains of what was once a bed, a wooden frame with a rotted, torn mattress, straw spilling out of the holes. In the center, an old table with a broken chair tipped on its side. Crooked shelves on the wall, with some objects Cecily couldn't quite make out in the dark. A strong smell of mold, rotten wood, abandonment, but also a smell of something else, something hard to identify. Old perfume? Dried flowers? Cecily wasn't sure. She walked to the center of the room, her steps making the floorboards groan and creak too loudly. Each sound echoed off the empty walls, multiplied, distorted. She set her bundle on the floor and rubbed her arms, trying to warm up. The wind whistled softly through the cracks in the walls, a continuous lament that made the hair on her neck stand up. Cecily examined the old bed. The mattress was unusable, but the wooden frame still seemed sturdy. She took her mother's shawl, spread it over the planks, and lay down curled in a fetal position, trying to conserve heat. She used her bundle as a pillow. She squeezed her eyes shut. The fatigue was immense, but fear prevented sleep. Every creak of the wood, every whistle of the wind, every rustle of leaves outside made her open her eyes in fright. Her brain created shapes in the shadows. She imagined figures moving. She heard sounds that perhaps didn't exist. Her heart beat fast, skipping beats. Hours passed like this. Cecily didn't know if she slept or just entered a state of restless torpor. At some point in the early hours, she heard something different. Footsteps, heavy footsteps outside, circling the shack slowly. Cecily sat up on the wooden bed frame, blood freezing in her veins. The footsteps continued. They weren't an animal. They were human. Calculated. Someone walking around the shack with purpose, examining, observing. Then the footsteps stopped in front of the door. Cecily held her breath. Seconds dragged like hours. Then the door, which she had left ajar, began to open slowly with that sharp groan of old wood. The weak beam of a lantern invaded the shack, sweeping the walls, the floor, until it found her. Cecily raised a hand to shield her eyes from the light. Behind the lantern, she could barely make out the silhouette of a tall man, broad shoulders, a wide-brimmed hat hiding his face. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" the man said with a deep, raspy voice. Cecily tried to speak, but her voice came out as a wheeze. She coughed, tried again. "Please don't hurt me," she managed to say with a trembling voice. "I didn't know it had an owner. I just needed a place to spend the night. I won't steal anything, I swear." The man took a step inside. The lantern light lowered a bit, and Cecily finally saw his face. He must have been about 35. Hard, angular features, a strong jaw covered by days of stubble, dark eyes watching her with an expression impossible to decipher. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was something between surprise and profound exhaustion. "This shack is mine," the man said finally. "It was abandoned, but it's still mine. You trespassed." The voice wasn't threatening, but it carried authority. Cecily stood up from the wooden bed, her legs wobbly. "I know, and I apologize," she spoke quickly. "I'll leave right now." She grabbed her bundle, adjusted the shawl over her shoulders with trembling hands. "Please, don't tell the village you saw me here. I'm already in enough trouble." The man tilted his head, studying her with uncomfortable attention. "You're the girl who refused Silas Thorne," he said. It wasn't a question. "Everyone in town is talking. They say you're stuck up, proud, that you snubbed a good marriage." Cecily felt anger replace fear for a moment. "He stalked me, tried to touch me, said horrible things," she replied with a hard voice. "I refused him because he's a filthy pig, not because I'm proud. But no one believes me. Everyone prefers to believe him because he has money." A long, heavy silence. The man continued looking at her with that indefinable expression. Then he did something unexpected. He lowered the lantern completely and sighed deeply, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. "I believe you," he said quietly. "I've known Silas Thorne since we were boys. I know exactly what kind of man he is. My name is Robert Thornton. Folks call me Rob. I own the St. Sebastian farm, about 10 miles north of here. And this shack," he said, looking around as if seeing ghosts in the walls, "was where I was going to live with my fiancée 6 years ago. But she died before the wedding. Since then, no one lives here." Cecily felt something tighten in her chest. "I'm very sorry for your loss," she said sincerely. Rob shrugged, but the gesture seemed mechanical, rehearsed. "It was a long time ago," he replied without conviction. Another silence. Cecily expected him to send her away, expected to be kicked out once more. But Rob just stood there, looking around the shack as if fighting an internal battle with himself. Finally, he spoke. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked without looking at her. "No." "Have money?" "No." "Family? Friends?" "I have no one." Rob ran a hand over his face, the gesture of an exhausted man. "All right then," he said abruptly. "You can stay here temporarily." Cecily blinked, not believing what she was hearing. "But the place has been abandoned for 6 years," he continued with a firm, practical voice, as if talking business, not compassion. "It's falling apart. If you stay, you'll have to clean it, fix what you can, keep everything in order. I'll bring supplies once a week. But there are conditions." Cecily nodded quickly. "Any condition," she said. Rob stared at her with hard eyes. "First, no one in the village can know I let you stay here. If they ask, you broke in, and I know nothing. Understood?" She agreed. "Second, you don't touch anything that's locked or stored away. There are drawers, trunks, boxes in here. They aren't your concern. Third, when I come to bring supplies or fix something, you don't ask questions about me, about my life, about anything. I don't want conversation. We each mind our own business." Cecily agreed to every condition, although the third one made her uneasy. "I understand and I accept," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. You are saving my life." He shook his head. "I'm not saving anything," he replied with a harsh voice. "I'm just letting you use a place that was empty anyway. Don't mistake this for kindness." And he turned to leave. Before crossing the threshold, he stopped. Without looking back, he added something that sent a shiver down Cecily's spine. "Folks say this shack is cursed, that there are presences, voices, strange things. Aren't you afraid of that?" Cecily thought about the question. "I'm more afraid of the living than of dead ghosts," she answered honestly. Rob stood motionless for long seconds. Then he left without saying another word, the door creaking as it closed behind him. The sound of footsteps receded into the night. The engine of a truck, no, a wagon, rumbling in the distance and then fading, swallowed by the silence of the woods. Cecília was alone in the shack, but now she wasn't trespassing anymore. She had permission, temporary, conditional, cold, but it was more than she had half an hour ago. She lay down again on the wooden bed, pulled the shawl over her body, and finally, exhausted beyond the capacity to stay awake, she slept. She woke up with the sun already high, streaming through the broken windows. It took seconds to remember where she was. The shack during the day seemed less threatening than at night. The light revealed details the darkness had hidden. The moisture stains on the walls formed almost artistic patterns. The crooked shelves held some curious objects, a dusty bronze candlestick, a dented metal mug, an empty glass jar with a rusted lid. Cecília got up and examined the space carefully. There was no shortage of work. The floor needed a deep cleaning, sweeping away years of dirt, scrubbing off mold stains. The broken windows needed to be sealed somehow to keep wind and rain out. The wood stove needed deep cleaning before it could be used. The cracks in the walls needed to be caulked with whatever she could find. But before anything else, she needed to solve the most urgent issue: water and food. She stepped out of the shack for the first time in daylight and finally saw the place clearly. The Blackwood River ran a few yards away, muddy but apparently clean waters, making a soft sound as they passed over stones and sandbanks. Dense forests surrounded the shack on the other sides, tall trees and thick underbrush creating a green, living wall. Birds sang in the branches. The winter sun warmed pleasantly without burning. Cecília went down to the river, knelt on the bank, and drank water straight from her cupped hands. It was cold, tasting of earth and leaves, but it quenched her desperate thirst. She washed her face, her arms, her neck. The cold water drove away the last remnants of sleep and brought mental clarity. Hunger was the bigger problem. She had no food at all. Rob had promised to bring supplies, but didn't say when the first time would be. Cecília went back to the shack and inspected every corner looking for something edible. She found nothing. She decided to explore the surroundings. Maybe she would find wild berries, edible roots, something to save her until Rob appeared. She walked along the riverbank, keeping the shack always in sight so as not to get lost. After a few minutes, she found a blackberry bush heavy with fruit. It wasn't quite the season, but some late berries still hung from the branches. Cecília picked them eagerly. She knew she needed more, perhaps pecans or muscadine grapes if she ventured further, but she had no pot or fire. She would eat the berries raw, even if they weren't very nutritious. She returned to the shack with a handful of blackberries, feeling strangely victorious. It was little, but it was something gained with her own effort. She sat in the doorway of the shack with her feet dangling over the 2 stone steps of the entrance, and ate the dark fruit slowly, savoring each piece. It didn't kill the hunger, but it helped. The rest of the day passed in work. Cecília swept the floor of the shack with a makeshift broom made of tied branches. Dust rose in clouds that made her cough, but gradually the wooden floor emerged, revealing planks that were old but still solid. She cleared the cobwebs from the corners and ceiling. She organized the few objects on the shelves, wiping each one carefully. She gathered leaves and debris the wind had blown inside through the broken windows over the years. When the sun began to set, Cecília was exhausted, but the shack looked minimally habitable. There was still a lot of work to do, but at least it wasn't just a warehouse of abandonment and filth anymore. At night, the cold returned, intense. Cecília had no blanket, so she improvised by gathering dry leaves from the woods and spreading them over the wooden bed as thermal insulation. It worked a little. She lay down dressed, wrapped in the shawl, and tried to sleep. That was when she heard it for the first time. Footsteps inside the shack. Slow, heavy, walking from one side to the other. Cecília opened her eyes in the dark, heart racing. The footsteps continued. They weren't imagination. They were real, making the floorboards creak with true weight. But she was alone. She was absolutely certain she was alone. She forced herself to sit up, eyes wide, trying to see in the almost total darkness. She saw only shadows, vague shapes, nothing defined. But the footsteps continued. Now they seemed to come from the direction of the corner where the locked trunk sat, the one she had noticed earlier but obeyed Rob's order not to touch. "Who's there?" whispered Cecily with a trembling voice. The footsteps stopped. Absolute and suffocating silence. Then, clear as a bell, a woman's voice echoed in the shack. "Get out!" Cecily screamed. She couldn't hold it back. She got up from the bed, tripping over her own legs, ran to the door, threw it open with force, and scrambled outside the shack. The freezing night air hit her like a slap. She stood on the stone step, shaking violently, unable to decide whether to run or go back. The shack behind her was silent now. No sound, no movement, just empty darkness looking at her through the broken windows. Cecily breathed deeply several times, trying to control the panic. Maybe she imagined it. Maybe it was fatigue, hunger, accumulated stress creating hallucinations. Maybe it was wind crossing the cracks in the wood, creating sounds the brain interpreted as a voice, but she had heard it clearly. Footsteps, voice, too real to be an illusion. She stayed out there for long minutes, hugging her own body to warm up, deciding what to do. Returning to the village wasn't an option. Silas Thorne was there. Rejection was there. Cold in the open would kill her eventually. The shack, as scary as it was still shelter. Finally, gathering courage she didn't know she possessed, Cecily went back inside. She left the door ajar to have a quick escape route if needed. She lay on the wooden bed but didn't sleep. She kept vigil the rest of the night, eyes open in the dark, ears attentive to any sound. But there were no more footsteps. There was no more voice. Just silence and cold until dawn. Rob appeared 3 days later at noon, driving an old wagon pulled by a bay horse. Cecily was at the river, washing the only spare dress she owned, when she heard the sound of hooves and wheels on the dirt. She quickly climbed up the bank with wet hands, her heart racing, unsure if it was fear or hope. He got down from the wagon without looking at her, movements efficient and practical. He began unloading wooden crates full of supplies. Sacks of cornmeal, rice, black-eyed peas, coarse salt, a bucket of lard, ground coffee, molasses, 3 cans of peaches, a bar of soap. He stacked everything at the entrance of the shack with military precision. Cecily approached slowly, still unsure how to act around that man. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," she said softly. "This will last weeks. You didn't need to bring so much." Rob finally looked at her. His face was more tired than the first night, deep dark circles under his eyes, beard more grown out. "Yes, I did," he replied with a rough voice. "I can't keep coming here every week. Draws too much attention. This has to last a month." Cecily nodded. "But I can pay somehow," she offered. "I can wash clothes, cook, sew, anything. I don't want to be dead weight." Rob stared at her for seconds too long. "You're already paying," he said enigmatically. "You're keeping this place inhabited, that's enough." Before Cecily could ask what that meant, Rob entered the shack. She followed him hesitantly. He examined the interior with critical eyes, noting the clean floor, the organized shelves, the removed cobwebs. "You cleaned," he observed with something that might have been surprise. "Looks better." "I did what I could," replied Cecily. "But there's still a lot to do. The windows need urgent repair. The stove needs deep cleaning before it can be used, and there are cracks in the walls that let the cold in at night." Rob nodded distractedly. He was looking at the corner where the locked trunk sat. He walked over there, checked the lock, seemed satisfied that no one had tampered with it. Then he turned abruptly to Cecily. "Did you hear anything strange here?" he asked bluntly. Cecily hesitated. She remembered the third condition: no questions about him, about anything. But he was asking her a direct question. "I did," she admitted finally. "On the second night, footsteps and a woman's voice telling me to get out." She expected Rob to laugh, to say it was imagination, to deny it. But he did none of that. He just closed his eyes briefly and sighed like a man carrying an impossible burden. "Sorry," he said quietly. "I thought maybe it wouldn't happen anymore." Cecily felt a shiver run down her spine. "Do you know what causes this?" she asked with a trembling voice. "Do you know why folks say this place is cursed?" Rob opened his eyes and stared at her. "It's not a curse," he replied with a tired voice. "They're just memories that insist on staying. Places keep echoes of pain. This place keeps mine." Before Cecily could process that enigmatic answer, Rob left the shack. He returned with tools from the wagon: hammer, nails, pieces of sawn lumber, burlap to caulk cracks, panes of glass to fix the windows. He spent the next 3 hours working in almost absolute silence. He fixed the windows with the skill of someone who knows manual labor. He caulked the larger cracks in the walls. He checked the roof structure and replaced 2 tin sheets that were completely riddled with holes. Cecily watched him, offering help when she could, holding boards in place while he nailed, passing tools he asked for with gestures rather than words. They worked in a strange synchronization, almost without verbal communication, but efficient. When he finished, the shack was significantly more solid. The windows had whole panes that would stop wind and rain. The walls no longer had large gaps. The roof was sealed. Rob cleaned the tools with an old rag, put everything back in the wagon, and prepared to leave. Before climbing onto the wagon, he stopped and looked at Cecily. "There's going to be a fair in the village in 2 weeks," he said. "4th of July celebration. Everyone will be there. It's a good time for you to fetch water from the well in the square without being bothered. No one will notice." Cecily nodded, grateful for the information. "And Mr. Thornton," she called as he was already climbing onto the wagon seat. "What happened here? What happened to your fiancée?" Rob's face closed like a slamming door. "I said no questions," he replied harshly, and he snapped the reins, making the horse start in a quick trot, kicking up dust on the road. Cecily watched until the wagon disappeared around the bend. She went back inside the shack, feeling confused. Rob was an impossible puzzle, rough but not cruel, generous but not kind, keeping secrets that seemed to rot him from the inside. The following days established a routine. Cecily woke with the sun, went to the river to fetch water in an old tin can she found in the shack, prepared coffee and grits on the stove she finally managed to clean and use. She spent mornings improving the shack in small details, sweeping, organizing, fixing. Afternoons were dedicated to exploring the surroundings carefully, always keeping the shack in sight. She found pecan trees, wild plum bushes with sour but edible fruit, even a patch of wild onions. At night, she lit candles and tried to occupy her mind so as not to think about the fear. Sometimes she hummed softly. Sometimes she prayed. Sometimes she just sat watching the shadows dance on the walls with the flickering light of the flames. And sometimes, when the moon was full or nearly so, she heard the footsteps again. Always at the same time, around midnight. Slow steps circling the outside of the shack, stopping at the door, but never entering. Cecily learned not to scream, not to run. She just lay there breathing deeply, waiting for it to pass. And it always passed. One night, 10 days after Rob's last visit, Cecily woke up not to footsteps but to weeping. Muffled sobs of a man trying not to make noise but failing. It was coming from outside, near the river. Cecily got up slowly, lit a candle, went to the window. In the silvery light of the full moon, she saw Rob. He was kneeling on the riverbank, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, hands covering his face. He was crying with the despair of a man who has held on to pain for too long. She didn't know what to do. The rule was no questions, don't interfere. But seeing a human being suffering like that, alone in the darkness, broke something inside her. Cecily grabbed her shawl, covered her shoulders, and left the shack slowly. Rob didn't notice her approach initially, so lost was he in his own agony. When Cecily knelt beside him on the riverbank, he startled violently. He tried to pull away, wipe his face quickly, recompose the hard mask. But it was too late. She had already seen it. "Sorry," said Cecily softly. "I shouldn't have come, but I couldn't stay inside listening to you suffer like this alone." Rob turned his face away, jaw tense. "I told you not to ask questions," he said with a voice hoarse from crying. "I'm not asking questions," replied Cecily with firm gentleness. "I'm just sitting here beside you. Sometimes we don't need questions. We just need company." They sat in silence for long minutes. The river flowed, making its eternal murmur. Crickets sang on the bank. The full moon illuminated everything with ghostly clarity. Finally, Rob began to speak. His voice came out broken, hesitant, as if every word cost a piece of his soul. "Her name was Eleanor," he said, looking at the dark water. "Eleanor Gray. She was the village schoolteacher. I met her when I came to arrange French lessons. My late mother wanted me to be a cultured, educated man. Eleanor was 5 years younger than me. Long black hair, eyes that seemed to read your soul, a laugh that lit up any room." He stopped, swallowed hard. "We fell in love fast. She was everything I wasn't, cheerful, light, full of hope. I was a closed-off farmer, rough, always too serious, but with her I could smile. I could imagine a future." Cecily listened without interrupting, just being present. Rob continued. "I built this shack for her," he spoke, gesturing vaguely towards the building. "Eleanor didn't want to live in the big house at the farm with my controlling mother. She wanted a place of our own, simple, near the river she loved. I worked 6 months, building every board, every window, every detail, thinking of her. It would be our first home. We were to marry in June of 1922. His voice trembled. But 3 weeks before the wedding, she disappeared. Cecily held her breath. "Disappeared how?" she asked softly. Rob ran his hands over his face. "She left home on a Saturday morning saying she was going to visit a sick student at a neighboring farm. She never got there. She never came home. We searched for days, weeks, scoured every inch of land between the village and the farm. Nothing, no trace, no clue, no body. Eleanor simply vanished as if she had never existed." "Do you think she ran away?" asked Cecily hesitantly. Rob shook his head vehemently. "Eleanor loved me," he said with absolute conviction. "I know she loved me. She wouldn't have run away without saying anything, without taking anything. All her clothes, her books, her things were at home. Her mother almost went mad with grief. No, Eleanor didn't run away. Something happened to her, something terrible, but I never found out what, and that has been eating me alive for 6 years. Cecily felt hot tears sting her own eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said with a choked voice. "It must be torture, living without knowing." Rob looked at her for the first time since he started telling the story. "That's why I come here," he confessed. "In this shack I built for her. I keep her things in that locked trunk. Clothes, letters, drawings she made. I come here in the early hours when I can't sleep, and I keep searching. Searching for what, I don't even know anymore. Some clue I missed. Some detail that explains. Some sign that she really existed and wasn't just my dream. That's why folks say the shack is haunted," Cecily realized. "They hear me walking in the early hours," Rob said bitterly. "They see candlelight in the windows. They hear my crying when the pain gets unbearable. And they created legends. It's easier to believe in ghosts than in a shattered man who can't move on." Cecily reached out slowly and touched his shoulder lightly. "You aren't shattered," she said with surprising firmness. "You are human, and humans carry pain. It's not weakness to cry for who you loved. It's proof that your heart still works. Rob looked at her hand on his shoulder as if it were an alien object. Then slowly he covered her hand with his own. His fingers were calloused, large, warm. They stayed like that for a moment, suspended in time. Then Rob stood up abruptly, breaking contact. "I need to go," he said, returning to his usual rough voice. "It's almost dawn." Cecily stood up too. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. Rob stared at her with an indecipherable expression. "You won't tell anyone," he ordered more than asked. "I have no one to tell," Cecily replied with simple sadness. "We are two lonely people keeping secrets from each other." Rob nodded. He began walking toward the road where he had left his horse tied. He stopped, turned back. "Cecily," he called. It was the first time he used her name. "What brought you here? What did you do for Silas Thorne to stalk you like that?" Cecily took a deep breath. If he had shared his pain, she could share hers. "My parents died when I was 12, she began. "Fever that swept the village. I went to live with an aunt and uncle who didn't want me. At 17, they basically sold me in marriage to a violent man, a rich farmer from the interior. The night before the wedding, he came to my room, tried to force me, saying I was already his anyway. I hit him with a candlestick and climbed out the window." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "I walked for days until I got to Blackwood Creek. Aunt Martha took me in, but always as a burden, never as family. I worked quietly, obediently, invisible for 3 years, until Silas Thorne started stalking me. When I refused to marry him, my godmother kicked me out believing his lies. And here I am, run away twice from men who think women are property." Rob stood in silence, processing. Then he said something unexpected. "You are braver than I am." He spoke low. "I lost someone and got stuck in the past." "You survived terrible things and keep fighting." Cecily shook her head. "It's not courage," she replied. "It's stubbornness. I refuse to let bad men decide my fate." Something changed in Rob's look. It wasn't pity. It was something close to respect. "I'll bring more supplies next week," he said, "and I'll bring fabric, thread, needles. I know you know how to sew. You can make better clothes for yourself." Cecily smiled, the first time in days. "Thank you. That would be very useful." Rob nodded briefly and walked away. Cecily went back to the shack feeling something strange and unknown in her chest. It wasn't just fear and loneliness anymore. It was something warmer, connection, understanding, maybe even hope. If you're enjoying this story, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear a story of true resilience. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes. Rob started coming more often, always in the early hours when no one would see, always bringing something useful, fabric as promised, but also old books he had at the farm, saying Eleanor liked to read, and maybe Cecily would like to too. More tools to continue repairs on the shack. Once he brought a thick wool blanket saying it was spare at the farm, an obvious lie but one Cecily accepted with gratitude. And they began to talk. At first just brief and practical exchanges. Then longer conversations. Rob talked about the farm, about the difficulties of keeping everything running alone since his mother died 2 years ago. Cecily talked about the books she read, about improvements she planned for the shack, about small joys, like discovering a hummingbird nest in the tree near the door. They didn't speak of Eleanor again. They didn't speak of the painful past. They focused on the present, on those stolen hours of the dawn where two lonely souls found unexpected company. One night, Rob brought an old guitar, said it had been his father's, that he himself never learned to play right. Cecily confessed her mother had taught her some songs before dying. She took the instrument with hesitant fingers, tuned the strings with knowledge she didn't know she had preserved, and played a simple, sad melody. Rob listened in absolute silence, eyes closed, an expression of pain and peace mixed. When she finished, he opened his eyes and there was something different there. Vulnerability. "Cecily," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something. For the last 6 years I was dead inside. I breathed, worked, existed, but I didn't live. I came here looking for Eleanor obsessively because it was the only thing that gave purpose." He hesitated. "But since you arrived, something changed. This place that was a tomb of memories started to look less gloomy, not because of the place, because of you." Cecily felt her heart race. She didn't know how to respond. Before she could try, they heard the sound of horses approaching. Several horses, loud voices, torches lighting up the night. Rob stood up fast, tense. "Blow out the candle," he ordered low. Cecily obeyed instantly, plunging the shack into darkness. Rob went to the window, peeked carefully. "Damn it," he whispered. "It's Thorn. He brought men with him." Cold fear flooded Cecily. "How did he find out where I am?" she whispered desperately. Rob shook his head. "Someone must have seen smoke from the chimney, or seen me coming here. Small town, eyes everywhere." He looked at her urgently. "Hide, inside the trunk in the corner, fast." "But you said not to touch the trunk," protested Cecily. Rob was already opening the trunk with a key he pulled from his pocket. "Now I'm telling you to touch it. Get in and stay quiet no matter what you hear. Understood?" Cecily ran to the trunk. Inside there were women's clothes carefully folded, letters tied with ribbon, drawings, personal items of Eleanor's. There wasn't much space, but she curled up, managing to fit. Rob closed the lid carefully, locked it, pocketed the key. The voices outside got louder. They banged on the door violently. Thorne's voice echoed with authority. "Robert Thornton, I know you're in there. Open this door now or we'll break it down." Rob lit a candle, messed up his own hair, and opened the door with a perfectly staged, irritated expression. "What the hell do you want, Silas?" he said with a voice hoarse from fake sleep. "It's 2 a.m. Silas Thorne entered, pushing Rob without ceremony, followed by 4 goons armed with rifles. The light of the torches invaded the shack, revealing the simple interior. "Where is she?" demanded Silas, looking around. "I know you're hiding that slut here." Rob crossed his arms, expression cold. "I don't know who you're talking about," he replied. Silas laughed humorlessly. "Cecily, obviously. The sassy orphan who refused my marriage proposal disappeared a month ago. Someone saw smoke coming from this cursed shack. Someone else saw you coming here at dawn several times. 2 + 2 is 4, Rob. You're hiding her here." Rob showed no reaction. "This shack is mine," he said with a dangerously low voice. "I come here when I want because it's my property. I don't owe an explanation to you or anyone. And I'm not hiding any girl. As you can see, I'm alone." Silas gestured to the goons. "Search everything," he ordered. "Turn over every corner." The men began to destroy the interior of the shack. They threw pans on the floor, overturned the table, tore the old mattress looking for hiding places. They opened the shelves, knocking down objects. One of them tried to open the trunk in the corner. "It's locked," he shouted to Silas. The merchant turned to Rob. "The key," he demanded, extending a fat hand. Rob didn't move. "No," he said simply. Silas's expression darkened. "What do you mean, no?" "This shack is in my jurisdiction as a town councilman. I have authority to investigate suspicious activities. Give me the key or I order it forced open." Rob took 2 steps approaching Silas until they were almost nose to nose. "You have no jurisdiction here," he said, with a voice that cut like a blade. "This shack sits on St. Sebastian farmland, my private property recorded in the deed office. You trespassed on my property without a warrant, without authorization, without legal cause. You are committing a crime, so I suggest you take your goons and leave now, before I go to the sheriff tomorrow morning and file a formal complaint." Silas stepped back, his face red with rage. "You're protecting her," he accused. "Why? Do you pity the poor little thing, or are you taking advantage of the situation? Maybe you're keeping her here as a hidden mistress away from judging eyes." The punch came so fast no one saw it. Rob hit Silas's jaw with a force that threw the older man to the floor. The goons pointed their rifles, but Rob showed no fear. "Get out," he said with a deadly voice. "Get out now before I forget that killing trash like you would put me in jail." Silas got up with difficulty, hand on his bleeding chin. He looked at Rob with pure hate. "You'll regret this," he spat. "I'll investigate your every move, and when I prove you're hiding her, I'll make you pay, along with that ungrateful tramp." Rob took a threatening step, and Silas finally retreated. He left the shack stumbling, followed by the goons. They mounted their horses and galloped away, the sound of hooves fading until it disappeared completely. Rob waited long minutes in tense silence, making sure they were really gone. Then he ran to the trunk, unlocked it, opened it. Cecília was curled up inside, shaking violently. Rob helped her out carefully. She could barely stand, legs numb from the cramped position. "He found me," whispered Cecília with a broken voice. "He knows I'm here. He'll come back. He'll get me." Rob held her shoulders firmly. "He won't," he said with conviction. "I won't let him." Cecília shook her head, tears streaming. "You heard him. He'll investigate. He'll watch. Eventually he'll find me for real, and then—" Her voice failed. "Then I'll have to marry him or worse." Rob looked into her eyes for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. "Marry me." He spoke low but firm. Cecília blinked, not understanding. "What?" "Marry me," repeated Rob. "Tomorrow. We go to the courthouse in Oak Ridge, a town 20 miles from here where no one knows us. We marry legally. With a marriage certificate, Silas can't touch you. A married woman is her husband's responsibility under the law. He will have no power over you." "But that is—" Cecília struggled to form coherent words. "That would be a fake marriage just to protect me. You don't know me. You don't love me. You can't throw your life away for me." Rob let go of her shoulders and ran a hand over his own face, a gesture of fatigue she already knew. "You're right," he admitted. "I haven't known you long enough, and I'm not offering marriage for love. I'm offering it out of respect. Respect for your courage, for your strength, for the way you keep fighting even when the whole world turns against you." His voice became softer. "And maybe selfishly because in the last few weeks you've made me feel alive again in a way I haven't felt for 6 years. It's not love, not yet, but it's a start." Cecília felt something hot and desperate explode in her chest. "But Eleanor," she whispered, "you still love her, you still search for her. How can you marry me, carrying her in your heart?" Rob took Cecília's hands between his. "Eleanor is gone," he said with visible pain. "It took 6 years for me to accept it, but it's true. She's gone and she won't come back, and I can't keep living like a ghost, chasing another ghost." He looked deeply into her eyes. "I'm not asking you to replace Eleanor. No one can. But maybe we can build something new, something ours, without forgetting the past, but without being imprisoned in it." Cecília felt hot tears flow. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to accept that unlikely and wonderful salvation, but fear paralyzed her. "And what if you regret it?" she asked, trembling. "What if months, years from now you look at me and blame me for accepting something you offered only out of pity?" Rob pulled her closer. "If I regret it," he replied, "it won't be your fault. It will be for my own cowardice, but I won't regret it, Cecília. Look at me." She obeyed. "I may not offer passionate love right now, but I offer honesty. I offer respect. I offer protection. I offer a home, food, safety, dignity. And I offer time. Time for us to build something true if it's meant to be. No pressure, no obligations beyond the legal ones. You would have your own room, your own life, until you decide if you want more. What do you think?" Cecília took a deep breath. It was madness. Marriage to a man she had known for a month, a man tormented by a ghost of the past. but it was also salvation. It was her own choice for the first time in her life. It wasn't a terrified escape. It was a conscious decision. "I accept," she said finally. "I will marry you, but with a condition of my own. We have to promise honesty to each other. If someday you want to end this arrangement, you have to tell me. You can't let resentment rot in silence, and I promise the same." Rob nodded seriously. "I promise," he said, and for the first time since Cecily met him, he smiled. It was a small, hesitant smile, rusty from years without use, but it was real. "Then let's get married tomorrow," said Cecily, feeling courage grow, "and let's show Silas Thorne that women aren't property of powerful men. We are owners of our own fate." Rob took her hand and squeezed lightly. "Let's do it," he agreed. "And maybe, just maybe, we'll find something neither of us was looking for, something like true happiness." Rob returned at dawn with a simple but dignified navy blue cotton dress, black leather shoes that had belonged to his mother, and a white lace shawl, delicate as a spider web. He also brought a clean shirt for himself, pressed linen trousers, leather suspenders. They prepared in a silence loaded with nervousness and expectation. Cecily washed in the river with the soap Rob had brought weeks ago, scrubbing every inch of skin until she was red and clean. She combed her long, dark hair, which she hadn't cut since childhood, pinning it in a low bun at the nape of her neck with makeshift pins. She put on the blue dress that fell perfectly on her thin frame, fitting at the waist and shoulders as if it had been made to measure. She put on the shoes, which were a size too big but fit reasonably well. She covered her shoulders with the lace shawl. When she looked at herself in the piece of broken mirror hanging on the wall, she barely recognized her own image. She looked like a respectable young lady, not a desperate refugee. Rob waited outside the shack, leaning against the wagon. When Cecily came out, he straightened abruptly and stared. "You look beautiful," he said, with a voice hoarse from genuine surprise. Cecily felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You look presentable too," she replied with a slight nervous smile. The trip to Oak Ridge took 3 hours on the dirt road full of potholes and rocks. Rob drove the wagon in tense silence. Cecily watched the landscape of the woods pass by. Golden fields of dry grass, yellow trumpet trees blooming despite it being June, cattle grazing peacefully, isolated farms with large plantation houses and empty quarters since abolition 60 years ago. The sky was clear, deep blue and infinite, with a winter sun that warmed without burning. They tried to make conversation a few times, comments about the weather, about the road, about how Oak Ridge was a bigger town than Blackwood Creek. But words died fast, replaced by uncomfortable silence. Both were nervous. Both wondered if they were committing an irreversible madness. Oak Ridge really was bigger. It had 3 main streets with brick houses and clay tiles, hardware and fabric stores, 2 churches, a large courthouse with a painted wooden sign at the entrance. Rob parked the wagon in front of the courthouse, tied the horse to the post, and helped Cecily down. The justice of the peace was an elderly man with round spectacles and a thick grey mustache. He looked at Rob and Cecily with the expression of someone who has seen everything in life and nothing surprises him anymore. "Documents?" he asked with a tired voice. Rob presented his birth certificate and farm deed documents. Cecily had no documents. She was born in a small settlement where records were precarious, lost everything when her parents died. The justice sighed. "Without documents it's complicated," he said, "but I can make a sworn affidavit based on the testimony of you two. It'll serve for the civil marriage, but might cause trouble later if you need to prove something." Rob agreed quickly. "It'll do. We want to get married today." The process was bureaucratic and cold. Questions about full names, dates of birth, parents' names, witnesses. The justice himself called 2 courthouse clerks to serve as witnesses. They filled out forms, signed papers. The justice read in a monotone voice the articles of the civil code regarding conjugal rights and duties, asked if both accepted matrimony of their own free will. Both answered yes, with voices that trembled slightly. "Then I declare you husband and wife by the law," said the justice, stamping the final document with force. "You may kiss if you wish," he added with indifference. Rob and Cecily looked at each other. The moment was strange, an emotional anticlimax. There was no kiss, just a formal and hesitant handshake that seemed absurdly inadequate for people who had just married. They paid the fees, received the marriage certificate on thick paper with an official red seal, and walked out of the courthouse as legally united husband and wife. Outside, the sunlight seemed too bright. Cecily held the marriage certificate with trembling hands, looking at the document as if it were a magic object. "It's done," she said softly. "We're married." Rob nodded, hands in pockets. "It's done," he repeated. "You're protected now. Silas can't touch you." They should be happy, they should be relieved, but both felt only surreal strangeness. They had become family by legal decree, but were still strangers in many fundamental aspects. Rob noticed the discomfort. "Let's get some lunch somewhere," he suggested. "Celebrate somehow." Cecily agreed, grateful for the distraction. They found a small diner with rough wooden tables and the smell of home cooking. They ordered fried chicken with rice, black-eyed peas, collard greens, cornbread. They ate in silence initially, but gradually the good food and cozy atmosphere relaxed the tension. They began to talk about small and safe things. Rob talked about how the farm produced mainly beef cattle, but he wanted to diversify into cotton or peaches. Cecily talked about books she had read, about how she always dreamed of teaching children to read someday. In the middle of the meal, Rob said something unexpected. "Thank you," he spoke, looking at his plate. Cecily tilted her head, confused. "Why?" "For accepting my crazy proposal," replied Rob. "For trusting me when you had no reason to trust any man. I know you accepted because you had no choice. But even so, thank you." Cecily reached across the table and touched his fingers lightly. "I didn't accept just for lack of choice," she said with sincerity. "I accepted because in these weeks you treated me with more respect and dignity than anyone has in the last 8 years. Because you saw a human being in me, not an object or a burden. That means more than you imagine." Rob turned his hand and interlaced his fingers with hers. They stayed like that, hands joined on the table, in comfortable silence while they finished the meal. The trip back was different. They talked more, laughed even at small things, like the horse getting spooked by an armadillo crossing the road. The nervous tension gave way to something lighter. It wasn't love yet. But it was budding friendship, it was companionship, it was a beginning. When they arrived at the shack, it was late afternoon. Rob helped Cecily down from the wagon. "Will you sleep here tonight?" she asked hesitantly. "Or go back to the farm?" Rob hesitated. "The farm needs me," he replied. "I have hands working, but I need to supervise. But I can stay if you want, if you're afraid to be alone." Cecily shook her head. "I'll be fine," she said with courage she didn't completely feel. "But can you come tomorrow, just so we can talk?" Rob smiled, that hesitant, rusty smile. "I'll come," he promised, "and I'll start bringing your things from the farm gradually. Clothes, furniture, utensils. We're going to turn this shack into a real place for you to live, until we decide the next step." Cecily nodded gratefully. Rob climbed onto the wagon, waved, and left. Cecily entered the shack holding the marriage certificate against her chest. She looked around the simple space that had been Rob's sanctuary of pain and her desperate refuge. Now it was something else. She didn't know exactly what yet, but it was the start of something new. The following days established a new routine. Rob came every morning early, always bringing something: clean sheets, feather pillows, good pots, silverware that had belonged to his mother. calico curtains for the windows, a rag rug for the floor, chairs with no broken legs, a solid table. With each item, the shack became less abandoned and more inhabited. They worked together, transforming the space. Rob fixed the old bed frame and brought a mattress of fresh straw. Cecily sewed cushions with fabrics he brought. They painted the interior walls with white lime, which brightened everything dramatically. Rob built new, sturdier shelves. Cecily organized the supplies, the books, the objects with loving care, and they talked. They talked while they worked, while they ate the simple meals Cecily prepared, while they rested on the entrance step watching the river run. Deep conversations about dreams, fears, regrets, light conversations about nonsense that made them laugh, comfortable silences that didn't need to be filled. Cecily learned that Rob woke up before dawn every day since childhood because his father was strict with schedules, that he liked his coffee strong and black, that he had an irrational fear of spiders, despite being a big, strong man, that he played guitar badly but liked to try, that he missed his mother despite her having been controlling and difficult. Rob learned that Cecily hummed softly while cooking without realizing it, that she had a photographic memory and remembered every page of every book she read, that she made dry jokes with a serious face that caught him off guard, that she cried easily at sad stories, but never cried over her own tragedies, that she had a scar on her left wrist from when she fell out of a tree at 9 years old trying to pick a peach. 2 weeks after the wedding, Rob arrived at the shack with a somber expression. "Silas is spreading rumors in the village," he said. "Says you and I are living in sin, that I'm a degenerate who took advantage of a vulnerable girl, that you are a mistress and not a wife." Cecily felt anger boil. "We have a marriage certificate," she said. "We can prove it's a lie." Rob shook his head. "He says we forged documents, that we bought a corrupt official, that the marriage isn't valid because you had no documents of your own. He's poisoning the whole village against us." Cecily clenched her fists. "Then let's go to the village and show the truth. We face him publicly." Rob hesitated. "It could be dangerous," he warned. "Silas has allies, he has money, he has power." Cecily lifted her chin. "I don't care," she said firmly. "I've spent my whole life running and hiding, not anymore. I'm your legal wife. I have the right to walk with my head held high." Something shone in Rob's eyes. Pride, admiration. "Then we go together," he decided. "Sunday is church service. Everyone will be at the chapel. It's time to show our faces." Sunday arrived with a clear sky and biting chill, typical of July. Cecily wore the blue wedding dress, combed her hair with care, covered her shoulders with the lace shawl. Rob wore a dark suit he hadn't worn in years, hair combed back, beard trimmed. They looked like a respectable couple. The trip to the village was tense. When they arrived at the chapel square, people saw them. Conversations stopped, looks turned, murmurs started like a swarm of bees. Rob got down from the wagon, helped Cecily down, and offered his arm. She held it with a firm hand. They walked together toward the chapel with determined steps. Silas Thorne was at the chapel door talking to Reverend Thomas. When he saw Rob and Cecily, his face turned red with rage. "What an outrage!" he shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "Bringing your mistress to the house of God. Have you no shame, Robert?" Rob stopped 10 feet from Silas. "She is not my mistress," he said with a clear, firm voice. "She is my wife. We married legally 3 weeks ago in Oak Ridge. We have a certificate registered at the courthouse." And he pulled the document from his jacket pocket, unfolded it, showed it for all to see. "Lies," bellowed Silas. "Fake document. Everyone knows that Tramp doesn't even have a birth record. Marriage without documents isn't valid." Cecily took a step forward. "You stalked me, you harassed me, you spread lies about me when I refused your disgusting advances," she said, with a voice that trembled with rage but not fear. "You destroyed my reputation because your ego couldn't handle rejection. But I am not your property." I never was. I never will be. Silas advanced with a raised fist. Shut up, you tramp! Rob placed himself between them instantly. Touch a finger on her and I'll break your arm, he said with a deadly voice. Silas retreated, but his eyes flashed hate. She's no good, he spat. An honest girl doesn't refuse a good marriage. An honest girl doesn't go live alone in a cursed shack. Everyone knows her type. That was when something unexpected happened. Mrs. Higgins, the seamstress, took a step forward in the small crowd that had formed. I know her type, she said with a strong voice. She's the type of hard-working, honest girl you tried to buy like cattle at the market. I saw you stalking her, Silas. I saw you cornering her in the street. Everyone saw, but no one had the courage to speak because you are powerful. But I'm tired of staying silent. Another voice joined in. Mr. Miller from the store. I saw it too, he admitted with shame on his face. Sorry, miss, I should have defended you. Silas threatened to boycott me and I was a coward. More voices joined. People who had closed doors to Cecily now admitted they had seen Silas's harassment. That they knew of his lies, that they had been complicit out of fear or convenience. Reverend Thomas, an elderly man with a serene expression, raised his hand, asking for silence. Silas, he said with gentle authority, if this marriage is legal by the law of men, it is legal by the law of God. You have no right to slander this young woman or this man. I ask that you apologize and end this scandal. Silas looked around, seeing the support he expected failing to materialize. His face was twisted with rage and humiliation. You will all regret this, he spat, all of you. And he walked away stomping, mounted his horse tied to the tree, and rode off in a gallop, raising dust. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Mrs. Higgins approached Cecily. Sorry, my child, she said with tears in her eyes. I was a coward when you needed help. But I'm happy you found someone to protect you. Other people approached with apologies, with ashamed greetings, with well wishes. Rob and Cecily accepted the apologies politely, but without warmth. The pain of rejection was still fresh. But something had changed. The village had seen the truth. Silas had been exposed publicly. Cecily's reputation was beginning to be restored. After the service, they returned to the shack in silence. When they arrived, Cecily finally broke down. Tears she had held back for weeks, for years, for a lifetime, came in a flood. Rob held her without saying anything, just offering a shoulder and presence. She cried until she had no more tears, body shaking with sobs that came from a deep, ancient place. When she finally calmed down, Rob wiped her face gently. You were incredible today, he said low. Braver than anyone I know. Cecily shook her head. I could only do it because you were by my side, she replied. I never had anyone by my side before, never knew what that was like. Rob held her face between his hands. You'll always have it now, he promised, no matter what happens. You aren't alone anymore. And he kissed her forehead with tenderness that made her heart ache. If you're moved by this story, leave a like. Stories of courage like this deserve to be shared. The following months brought profound changes. The shack was completely transformed. It was no longer a gloomy, abandoned place. White-painted walls reflected light. Colorful curtains danced in the windows. The smell of home cooking replaced the smell of mold. The sound of laughter replaced heavy silence. Cecily began giving reading lessons to local children. Rob spread the news, and gradually parents started bringing their kids. First 1 child, then 3, then 8. Cecily taught in the shack using books Rob bought in the city, a makeshift slate made of a board painted black. Chalk she made herself with lime and water. The children adored her. They called her Miss Cecily, with respect and affection. Rob spent more time at the shack, first just during the day, then he started having dinner there, then staying late talking by the wood stove that kept the place warm on freezing winter nights. One night when it was past midnight, he fell asleep in the chair, so tired he was. Cecily covered him with a blanket and let him sleep. When he woke up in the morning, Rob looked embarrassed. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to intrude on your space." Cecily smiled. "You didn't intrude on anything," she replied. "This place is yours too, always was. You built it for Eleanor but never really lived here. Maybe it's time to make this a real home. For both of us." Rob looked at her with an expression impossible to decipher. "Are you sure?" he asked hesitantly. "I don't want to pressure you. I know our marriage started as an arrangement." Cecily took a step closer to him. "It started as an arrangement," she agreed. "But it's not just that anymore, at least not for me." She took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I fell in love with you, Rob. I didn't plan it. I didn't expect it. But it happened. In the last few months you showed me what true partnership is, what respect is, what it is to be seen as a complete person, not a problem or possession, and I love that. I love you." The silence that followed was eternal. Rob stood motionless, eyes wide, as if he didn't believe what he was hearing. Then he did something that surprised both of them. He started to cry. Not dramatic sobs, but silent tears running down his face while he tried to speak and failed. Finally, he managed. "I fell in love with you too," he admitted with a hoarse voice. "I tried not to let it happen. I felt guilt, as if I were betraying Eleanor. But you aren't betrayal. You are a new beginning. You are life coming back to me after years dead inside. You are the strongest and kindest person I've ever met. And I love you differently than I loved Eleanor, but no less truly. I love you, Cecily." She closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was a hesitant kiss at first, two wounded hearts testing if it was safe to open up. Then it deepened, became a kiss of promise and hope and true love finally declared. When they separated, both were crying and laughing at the same time. That night, Rob didn't sleep in the chair. Cecily invited him to share the bed. They lay hugged under the thick blanket, just holding each other, hearts beating in sync, warmed not just by body heat, but by the warmth of the love they finally admitted feeling. Winter passed and spring arrived with an explosion of colors. Dogwoods and azaleas bloomed, birds returned singing, the woods turned green again, and the shack that was once a place of mourning became a home of love. Cecily discovered she was pregnant in September. She told Rob one morning while he was fixing the fence of the small chicken coop they had built. He dropped the hammer, picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying simultaneously. "We're going to have a child," he repeated, as if he needed to say it out loud to believe it. "We're going to be a real family." The pregnancy was smooth. Rob became super protective, wouldn't let Cecily do heavy work. He hired a woman from the village to help with chores, brought a doctor from the city to examine her monthly, built a crib of carved wood with his own hands, every detail sculpted with love and hope. It was during one of these medical visits that the twist happened. The doctor, a young man recently arrived in the region, examined Cecily and then asked to speak with Rob alone. "There is something I need to tell you," he said with a serious expression, "about your first fiancée, Eleanor Gray." Rob's blood ran cold. "What about her?" he asked with a hoarse voice. The doctor hesitated. "I was finishing my residency in Atlanta 6 years ago when I treated a young woman gravely injured who was admitted to Grady Hospital. She had been attacked on the road, left for dead. She survived but lost her memory completely. Didn't remember her name, origin, family, anything. She was hospitalized for months. When she recovered physically, she was taken to a Sisters of Mercy home because she had nowhere to go." Rob held onto the table so as not to fall. "Are you saying Eleanor is alive?" he whispered. The doctor nodded. "Maybe. The young woman I treated had all the characteristics you described when you told me about your past. Long black hair, dark eyes, a burn scar on her left ankle, same age, same physical description. It could be a coincidence, but it could be her." Rob couldn't process it. Eleanor alive. After 6 years believing she was dead, after finally moving on, after marrying Cecily, after having a child on the way. What did he do now? Cecily entered the room at that moment. She saw the devastated expression on Rob's face and knew instantly that something terrible had happened. "What is it?" she asked with fear tightening her chest. Rob told her. Every word was like glass cutting his throat. When he finished, Cecily was white as a sheet, hand on her pregnant belly, instinctively protective. "You need to go," she said finally with a trembling voice. "You need to go to Atlanta to check if it's her. You need to know." Rob shook his head violently. "I don't want to leave you. Not now." Cecily held his hands. "Rob, if Eleanor is alive, you have to find her. You have to help her. No matter what that means for us. I can't live knowing we left her abandoned in a home without memory. It wouldn't be right." "But what about you?" asked Rob desperately. "And our child?" Cecily smiled through tears. "We'll be here when you get back," she promised. "No matter what you find out, no matter what you decide, we'll be here, because I love you for real, Rob. And true love doesn't bind. True love sets free." Rob traveled to Atlanta the next day. It was 3 days of torture. Cecily stayed in the shack trying to keep the routine, teaching the children, cooking, cleaning, but her heart was in pieces. She was afraid of what Rob would find, afraid of losing him, afraid of the future. When Rob returned, it was early morning. Cecily was awake, unable to sleep. She heard the horse approach, ran to the door. Rob got down, staggering with fatigue. His face was marked by emotions he had processed. "It was her," he said low. "It's Eleanor. She's alive." Cecily felt her world crumble, but she forced herself to ask, "How is she?" Rob ran a hand over his face. "She didn't recognize me," he replied with a broken voice. "She looked at me as if I were a stranger. The nuns said her memory never came back. She lives in the home, helps take care of orphan children, but remembers nothing of her previous life. Doesn't remember me. Doesn't remember the love we had. Doesn't remember who she was." "And what will you do?" asked Cecily with a minimal voice. Rob stared at her. "I spent 3 days in Atlanta talking to Eleanor, trying to make her remember. I showed photos, told stories. Took her for a walk in places we used to go when I visited the city. Nothing. She was kind, polite, but treated me as she treats any kind stranger. On the 3rd day," continued Rob, "she asked me why I was trying so hard to make her remember. I told the truth. I told her we were engaged, that I looked for her for years, that I never gave up. You know what she said?" Cecily shook her head, unable to speak. Rob had tears running down his face. She said, "The person you love doesn't exist anymore. She died when my memory died. I am another person now. I found peace caring for the children at the home. I found purpose. You should move on too. You should live your life with who really loves you in the present, not with a ghost of the past." Rob took a step toward Cecily. "I spent 6 years looking for Eleanor, and when I finally found her, I discovered you were right. The Eleanor I loved is gone. What I found was a kind woman at peace with the life she built, a woman who doesn't love me because she doesn't know me, a woman who gave me permission to be happy." He knelt in front of Cecily, took her hands. "I choose you," he said with absolute conviction. "Not out of obligation, not because Eleanor can't love me back, but because you are who I love. You are the one who really knows me. You are the one who built a life with me. You are the mother of my child. You are my present and my future, if you still want me." Cecily collapsed to her knees too, hugged Rob with desperate force. "I will always want you," she sobbed. "Always." The two stayed kneeling on the floor of the shack, embraced, crying tears of pain and relief and love that survived the most impossible test. Their son was born in April of 1929, a healthy boy with dark eyes and powerful lungs. They named him Michael. Rob held the baby with trembling hands, awestruck. "This is our miracle," he whispered. "Our family that started from nothing and became everything." The following years were of simple but deep happiness. The shack on the river bend completely ceased to be a cursed place. It became a makeshift school in the morning, a loving home in the afternoon and evening. Children from the village and neighboring farms came to learn with Miss Cecily. Rob expanded the building, adding 2 rooms and a larger living area. Cecily had 2 more children. Anne, with black hair like hers, then John, a perfect copy of Rob. The small house overflowed with life, noise, love. Silas Thorne tried to cause trouble a few more times, but his power had diminished after the public exposure. Eventually he gave up and left Cecily and Rob in peace. He died years later alone and bitter, living proof that power and money without character bring no happiness. Eleanor stayed at the home in Atlanta. Rob sent money anonymously through the sisters to help maintain the place. It was a way to honor the love they had without living trapped in it. Cecily supported this completely. The 2 women never met, but there was mutual respect across the distance. One winter night, many years later, when the children were already teenagers and the shack had turned into a real house with additions and improvements, Cecily and Rob sat on the same stone step of the entrance where they had talked for the first time. They looked at the countless stars in the clear southern sky. "Do you regret anything?" asked Cecily, resting her head on his shoulder. Rob thought for a moment. "I regret not finding Eleanor sooner to help her," he replied honestly, "but I don't regret anything we built. This life, this family, this love, it was all a choice, and I would choose it all again." Cecily smiled. "Me too," she agreed. Who would have thought the outcast girl and the lonely farmer would find happiness in the shack everyone feared? Rob kissed the top of her head. "The best loves start in the most unlikely places," he philosophized. "In places where we are forced to be real because there are no more masks to use." Inside the house, they heard the children talking and laughing. Michael played the guitar his father had taught him, music filling the night air, and sang with a beautiful voice inherited from her mother. John was probably reading, always the quietest of the 3. This was their legacy, not wealth or fame, but a family built with true love and conscious choices, a home made of forgiveness, healing, and courage to start over, even when everything seemed lost. The shack on the river bend was never called cursed again. It came to be known as the home of Miss Cecily and Farmer Rob. A place of open doors, hot food, and generous hearts. Children who learned to read there grew up and taught their own children. The story of unlikely love that was born between its walls was told and retold through the generations. Because some stories deserve to be remembered, stories of people who refused to let the past define the future, stories of love that was born not of instant passion, but of respect built brick by brick, conversation by conversation, choice by choice. Stories that prove the best happy endings aren't those without pain, but those where pain is transformed into wisdom and loneliness into true companionship. Cecily and Rob lived to an advanced age, always together, always grateful for the day destiny put them on the same winding path that led to the shack no one wanted. The place that should have been a curse became the greatest blessing of their lives. Because there, between old walls and an eternal river, 2 broken hearts found exactly what they needed to become whole again, someone who truly saw them, completely accepted them, and chose to love despite all the scars. And that is the true magic of real love. It's not perfect, it's not easy, but when it's real, it transforms even the darkest places into sanctuaries of light.